May we all become a beacon of light to stop it in its tracks.
Picture this: a woman who taught the whole world how to sing, how to smile through the rain, and how to believe that a spoonful of sugar really could make anything easier. That's the Julie Andrews most of us grew up with, poised, radiant, seemingly untouched by hardship. But here's what almost nobody talks about. Behind that flawless image was a woman who knew heartbreak intimately, who sacrificed more than fame ever gave back, and who, near the end of her story, quietly named the one person she considered the true love of her life. It wasn't who you'd expect. And to understand why, we have to go back to the very beginning, long before the awards, long before the world knew her name. Because for all the kings, presidents, and Hollywood legends Julie Andrews crossed paths with over the decades, she never measured her life by the company she kept on a red carpet. She measured it by the people who showed up before anyone was watching, the ones who believed in her when she was still just a girl with a remarkable voice and no guarantees. There was a young man who fell in love with her before either of them had any idea what their lives would become. There was a visionary whose single decision reshaped her entire career. There was a friendship so warm and so convincing on screen that audiences spent 50 years insisting it had to be real. There was someone who brought laughter back into her life during one of its darkest chapters. And then there was the one man whose devotion never wavered, not even after Julie lost the very voice that had made her famous, and with it, a piece of her heart. So today, we're counting down the 5 people who mattered most in Julie Andrews' life, building toward the final name, the one she herself called the greatest love she ever knew. Let's start at the beginning, with the man who knew her before any of this happened. His name was Tony Walton, and he met Julie Andrews back when neither of them was famous, just 2 ambitious young students in London, both chasing careers in theater. Julie was already turning heads with that extraordinary voice of hers, while Tony was quietly building the skills that would eventually make him one of the most respected costume and production designers in the business. What drew them together wasn't glamour. It was the ordinary stuff: late nights before auditions, small wins worth celebrating, and dreams neither of them could have fully imagined coming true. They married in the late 1950s, certain they were stepping into a lifetime together. Not long after, their daughter Emma arrived, and for a while, it really did seem like they had everything. Then Julie's career took off, and it didn't just grow, it exploded. Broadway opened the door to Hollywood, and Hollywood opened the door to a level of fame most people never experience. But with that fame came constant travel, endless filming schedules, and long stretches away from home. Tony's own career was thriving too, and slowly, without any single dramatic moment, their paths started drifting apart. There was no scandal, no ugly betrayal, just the quiet, painful truth that 2 demanding careers don't always leave room for a shared life. Even so, Julie never let bitterness creep into how she spoke about that chapter. Long after the divorce, she continued to speak of Tony with real warmth and gratitude, because he'd been there for her before any of the applause started. They stayed devoted co-parents to Emma, and they treated each other with a kind of respect that a lot of Hollywood couples never quite manage to hold on to. Julie understood something a lot of people take years to learn, that a first love doesn't have to last forever to matter. Tony Walton believed in her before the rest of the world did, and that meant something she carried with her for the rest of her life. He wouldn't end up being the one she loved most in the end, but he was the one who first showed her that the impossible might actually be within reach. By the early 1960s, Julie was already one of the brightest stars on Broadway, but Hollywood still hadn't caught up. And then came a blow that could have knocked the wind out of anyone. She had originated the role of Eliza Doolittle on stage in My Fair Lady and earned rave reviews doing it. Naturally, she expected to bring that same role to the big screen. Instead, the studio cast someone else. It was a gut punch. Julie kept her composure in public. She always did. But privately, she knew this decision had just altered the course of her career. And then, right as one door swung shut, another opened in a way nobody saw coming. Walt Disney had been quietly watching Julie's work for years, and he was convinced she had exactly the warmth and charm he needed for a new film he was developing, Mary Poppins. When he came to her with the offer, Julie was pregnant with her first child and assumed the studio would simply move on and find someone else. Disney did the opposite. He told her to take whatever time she needed, because there was no one else he wanted for the part. That single act of faith turned out to be one of the most pivotal moments of her career. When production finally started, Julie repaid that trust with a performance that captivated audiences everywhere. Mary Poppins became a massive success, and Julie walked away with the Academy Award for Best Actress in her very first major film role. Practically overnight, she went from a celebrated stage actress to one of Hollywood's biggest new stars. She never forgot who made that leap possible. For the rest of her life, Julie spoke about Walt Disney with real gratitude, because he'd believed in her exactly when others had passed her over. His confidence gave her more than a career boost. It restored her faith that sometimes a setback is just life clearing space for something bigger. But while Walt Disney changed the trajectory of her professional life, the next person on this list touched something much more personal. And together, they built one of the most beloved friendships in Hollywood history. When audiences watched Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer fall in love on screen in The Sound of Music, plenty of people were convinced they were watching something more than just great acting. The chemistry felt so real that fans spent decades wondering if the romance had continued once the cameras stopped rolling. That rumor never quite died down, but the real story was even more meaningful than the gossip. Julie and Christopher never became a couple. What they built instead was a friendship that lasted more than 50 years. One built on mutual respect, easy laughter, and real admiration for each other. On paper, their personalities couldn't have been more different. Julie carried herself with warmth, discipline, and a kind of quiet professionalism, while Christopher brought a razor-sharp wit and a sense of humor that kept everyone on set entertained. During the long, demanding months of filming The Sound of Music, that contrast turned into a bond neither of them saw coming. Christopher loved poking fun at just how enormous the film's success became, but he never once joked about Julie's talent. He praised her kindness, her intelligence, and her professionalism again and again, calling her one of the finest people he'd ever worked with. Julie's admiration for him came from a different place entirely. She valued his honesty, his remarkable skill as an actor, and his knack for making even the most grueling filming days genuinely fun. As the years rolled on, the two of them kept reuniting, for anniversaries, interviews, tributes to a film that had become woven into American culture itself. And every single time they appeared together, it reminded audiences exactly why people had fallen for their pairing in the first place. They'd laugh like old friends, finish each other's sentences, and swap memories that belonged only to the two of them. So when Christopher Plummer passed away, Julie's tribute to him was raw and heartfelt. She called him a treasured friend and an extraordinary artist who had enriched her life for decades. It was a quiet reminder of something important. The deepest bonds we form aren't always romantic ones. Sometimes they're built simply on trust, respect, and years of memories that never lose their shine. Christopher Plummer was never the love of Julie Andrews' life, but he became something almost as rare in Hollywood, a friend for life, someone whose place in her heart nothing else could replace. The next person on our list, though, came into Julie's world at a moment when what she needed wasn't admiration, it was strength. And that friendship would become one of the deepest sources of comfort she'd ever find. Not every meaningful relationship in Julie Andrews' life was romantic. Some of them showed up as friendship, steady, unwavering friendship, and nobody embodied that better than Carol Burnett. Their bond started through television, but it didn't stay professional for long. Both women had extraordinary talent and effortless charm, the kind that audiences instantly loved. But underneath the laughter, they also shared something else, a deep understanding of what decades in the public eye actually cost a person. With each other, they could speak honestly, without worrying about image, expectation, or the constant scrutiny that came with fame. Over the years, they appeared together on television specials, shared countless private conversations, and built something rooted entirely in trust. Julie often said Carol had a rare gift, the ability to make even the hardest moments feel a little lighter. And that gift became absolutely essential during one of the most painful chapters of Julie's life. After a throat surgery permanently damaged her singing voice, Julie faced a kind of grief she'd never experienced before. The voice that had defined her since childhood, the very thing the world had fallen in love with, was simply gone. It left her questioning not just her career, but who she even was without it. While the rest of the world mourned the loss of that legendary voice, Carol focused on something else entirely. She reminded Julie that her value had never been tied to just one talent. She pushed her to keep creating, keep laughing, and remember that people loved her, not only the performer. That friendship became a quiet but powerful source of strength for years afterward. Whenever the two of them showed up together publicly, their affection for each other was obvious. They laughed the way only lifelong friends can, and spoke about one another with genuine, unguarded admiration. Julie cherished Carol not because she had all the answers, but because she simply never walked away when things got hard. That kind of loyalty is hard to find anywhere, and it's especially rare in Hollywood. Still, as much as Julie loved and leaned on Carol Burnett, there was one person whose place in her heart was in a category all its own. Through triumph, through heartbreak, through decades of a life built together, one man remained the love Julie Andrews never stopped choosing. If there's one relationship that defines Julie Andrews' entire life story, it's the one she shared with Blake Edwards. When they met in the late 1960s, they were both carrying the emotional weight of previous marriages, and both understood, more than most people ever do, that fame guarantees absolutely nothing when it comes to happiness. And here's the interesting part. The public didn't fall for some glamorous Hollywood legend version of Blake. They fell for the thoughtful, intelligent, deeply compassionate man standing behind the spotlight. In him, Julie finally found something she'd been quietly searching for her whole life. A partner who accepted every single part of her, without ever asking her to be anyone other than herself. They married in the late 1960s and brought their two families together, building a home grounded in patience, laughter, and steady support. But their bond wasn't only romantic, it was creative too. Blake directed Julie in several successful films, including Victor Victoria, where she once again proved just how versatile she truly was. But the real measure of their relationship was never box office numbers or glowing reviews. It was the quiet way they showed up for each other when life got hard. When that throat surgery permanently damaged Julie's singing voice in the late 1990s, she later admitted it felt like losing a piece of who she was. And it was Blake who wouldn't let that loss define the rest of her story. He reminded her, over and over, that she was so much more than the voice audiences had adored for decades. He pushed her to keep acting, keep writing, keep directing, to keep finding new ways to inspire people. Julie would later say that Blake always saw possibility in moments where all she could see was loss. Their marriage lasted more than 40 years, right up until Blake passed away in 2010, making it one of the longest and most respected partnerships Hollywood has ever seen. Even after he was gone, Julie spoke about him with unmistakable tenderness, not just as the love of her life, but as her closest friend, her greatest champion, and the safest place she ever found in an industry where relationships like theirs are painfully rare. Looking back across every remarkable person who shaped her life, Julie Andrews made one thing unmistakably clear. Blake Edwards was the one she never stopped choosing, and the life they built together became the greatest story she ever lived. Julie Andrews spent her life surrounded by extraordinary people, but the 5 names we've walked through today tell us so much more than just a list of famous companions. Toni Walton was the young dreamer who believed in her before the world ever knew her name. Walt Disney saw her potential at the exact moment Hollywood still doubted her, and that decision opened the door to a career that would go on to inspire generations. Christopher Plummer became a lifelong friend, someone whose respect and affection for her never faded, long after the cameras stopped rolling. Carol Burnett showed her that real friendship can carry you through even the darkest moments a life in the spotlight can bring. And Blake Edwards was the one who never left her side through triumph, through heartbreak, through every single chapter in between. Together, these relationships reveal the woman behind the performances, someone who valued loyalty over fame, kindness over recognition, and genuine love over public attention. And maybe that's exactly why Julie Andrews has remained so beloved for so long. Her legacy isn't just found in the films people still watch and adore today. It's found in how she treated the people she loved, with gratitude, dignity, and unwavering respect, right to the end. Because when you look back on a life like hers, one thing becomes obvious. Awards collect dust and applause always fades. But the people who stand beside us through our greatest triumphs and our hardest losses, those are the ones who stay with us forever. For Julie Andrews, the greatest love of her life was never something Hollywood could put in a headline. It was measured in trust, in devotion, and in the quiet certainty that some people never truly leave us, even after they're gone. If this story moved you, let us know which relationship stayed with you the most. And be sure to subscribe for more timeless stories celebrating the legends who shaped Hollywood.